Welcome to another episode of A Come Together. We are live. I always this reminds me of when it counts down. It reminds me of Frasier. Or I just watched Good Morning Vietnam for the first time in my life this
Oh,
week.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I was showing my class some Robin Williams because they never watched the original Aladdin, and I was showing them some of his genius, and then it reminded me that I'd never seen Good Morning Vietnam, and how and I had to watch it. I mean, I think that it's good that I didn't watch it on 10 because I don't think I would have understood a lot of the references or a lot of the cultural weight of what the movie was at the
Yeah.
time. But I loved it. It was a ton of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, it's intense. I mean, it's fun and it's intense at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, which I feel like is a lot of what the world is like and is like, all the time. Um, Bobby, introduce yourself to everyone. Introduce
Well,
yourself to the podcast world.
hello, podcast world. I am really this an honor and a pleasure because this is my grandson here. So, being here and talking to you is really amazing and an honor. And I am, I guess, Yocheved Groll is my name, and in English, I have an English name, Janice, as well.
Mhm.
But I do use the word name Yocheved, and to my family, it's Bobby.
Yes, that's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. I was gonna ask, do you go by Yocheved for work, or do you
No,
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 you don't.
no,
Gotcha,
I don't.
gotcha.
I don't because my legal papers all said that. Um, but and I just got used to not. In my, but my identity is with Yocheved.
Definitely, of course. So we have all these fun conversations every Friday that are generally anywhere between like 45 minutes and 2 hours. And so I figured that it'd be fun to
Let the
capture one
world
of them.
in.
Yeah, to let the world in and capture some of it. And I think it'd be I actually wanted to do this with some of my other grandparents as well. And I have to see how amenable they are to it. But I think I missed the boat on a couple of them that they would have been more inclined to a couple of years ago. And at this point, they just don't want to, either they don't have the patience to, or they don't feel confident enough or comfortable enough to sit down and talk. And I think it's a shame because I think that as grandparents, we look up to you and we respect you and we look for your advice. We look for your understanding in a world that as we're trying to figure things out ourselves, to hear from people that have already navigated a lot of different aspects of life, the fun, the hard, the challenging, the exciting, and those that don't learn from the past are doomed to repeat it, right? So I was really I always love speaking with people that know a lot more than I do. So it's fun.
Well, there's the aspect of living longer and having experiences and knowing, and then there's this aspect of wanting to be the type of person where people want to seek your advice. So, it's something that when you're the grandma of a family, and you want very very much to make sure and to be involved, and you're praying that all your children are successful and that they're happy and that you want them to make the right choices in life, and being a part of that and is really the culmination, I guess, of a person's life work, because family really is your everything.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. I think I was talking to my cousin who's been staying by me for the last couple of weeks, and he's been observing. He's single and he's 28, and he's been observing our lives. Living with us and kind of checking it out. And we were talking about Shua. We're talking about just what goes into raising him and what it's like being a dad. And this cousin and I were very very close growing up. We still always very very close, and we just got along always. and he was asking me about what it's like to be a dad, and I was like, it's one of those things. I really wish that I could. I was like, I wish I could put it into better words, but I was like, it's just one of those things I never understood until I experienced it, and I don't even know how to phrase it, you know. And I feel like what you're describing in terms of being there for your family, being there for your grandkids, and having this be like a culminating kind of life experience. I feel like that's something that you only understand as you only really feel, maybe not understand, but you only really it really resonates with you as you're living it. You know, like I don't know how you could put that kind of idea into words or really try to portray it, you know, fairly relative to how you feel things, you know.
Everybody's different. I think that different people approach parenthood and being a grandparent differently. Um, Different people have a different focus. For me, um, I have grandchildren who are just born, and I
Hmm.
have grandchildren who are older. For me, it's very much, I'm very, very involved. And for me, it's sort of like being a parent once removed, so to speak.
Yeah.
Just like you couldn't understand what it feels like to be a parent until you experience it. For me, being a grandparent, really and truthfully, the same love, anxiety, stress, worry, uh, all of it applies in the same way. So when you have a family, it really does occupy a lot of you because a lot of it takes a lot of very important space in your heart
Yes.
um, because that's how I approach it. I don't think that everybody in my in my experience, I don't think everybody feels that way or approaches it that way. But that's true
Hmm.
with parenthood also. Not
Right.
everybody, and there was I think it was I'm not sure. I think it was like the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Talmud Tzedek. He
Hmm.
said that if you don't think about each one of your children for 20 minutes a day, you haven't fulfilled the obligation as a parent. So as you have a family grows, that's a lot of headspace. So, but it's sort of you're feeling about you're bouncing off of the day and the experiences of the people. And then as your children get older, um, it's also how much they want to let you in.
Yeah.
So it's a give and take. It's a give and take. My relationship with you is, I guess, and unique in a way because we love to talk to each other. So
Hmm.
not everybody has the patience to spend the amount of time to talk about the things that we love to talk about, which really really has a variety of
Do you
different
think that's
topics.
just? You think that's just? You think it's just personality, or you think that like I feel sometimes like I'm not in the mood to talk, and then when I find that I do talk, I feel so much better. Like I have a feeling that by the end of this podcast, I'm not going to be cranky anymore. You know, like I have a feeling that like I started cranky and like, but and like you can do things to almost like like I think that we have like some deep seated, you know, needs, and I think that one of them is self expression and sharing and kind of getting that kind and community and interaction, you know, and whether we know it or not, like we want, you know, I think we want it, and then when we engage in it, we almost always walk away feeling like, oh, that was good, you know. But sometimes you have to like sometimes part of the fight is actually just showing up and making yourself available, you know, and making yourself putting the time aside or picking up the phone when you don't feel like it and calling or, doing things like that. And then you almost never regret it at the end of it.
I agree. I think that the sharing should be thoughtful sharing, and I think that when people um, open up and they talk and they share with loved ones, they definitely feel better. I also feel that sometimes people aren't thoughtful before they speak, and when that happens, they regret the
Mhm.
conversation, and that's a horrible feeling. So I think two things. I think people should be thoughtful. They should share in a thoughtful manner, um, and definitely if a person is feeling out of sorts or so, they definitely should reach out. As a matter of fact, I was just listening to something this morning that had to do with the Torah portion of the week, and it was about having somebody, a mentor, or somebody that you can speak to,
Yeah.
who is somebody worthwhile, somebody who really has your best interest at heart and who are worthy of that. So
Yeah.
I definitely feel so. I feel both ways, but I think that before people open up their mouth, they should be thoughtful about what comes out.
It's funny that you say that because that's I recently, as a couple of weeks ago, I decided that I'm really not going to be consuming a lot of hard liquor anymore. And one of the reasons why was because the more I thought about it and the more I looked back, the less that I've been happy with the way that I express myself, with it, and part of what people say that they like about it is that it lowers their inhibitions or brings down the wall a little bit, and so that things that when they would ordinarily be a little bit more cautious about or a little bit more reserved about, they're a little bit more open with. And for some people that works, and I found that for myself that recently i I don't like the way that I interact, and I find that I'm less thoughtful and I'm a little bit more short and a little bit more I'm worse at the exchange in conversation, at the back and forth. And I said to myself that, if there's like, if there's a time where I want a drink to taste it and enjoy and just relax, I'll have one. But overall, if there's going to be a situation, if it's like a party or simcha or whatever it is, to stick with something, much lighter, like, a light beer or some wine, because I've done a lot of reflecting about it. I don't think that it's very good for me. I don't think it's very good for those thoughtful interactions. So it's funny that you said that, because I've been working very I've walked away from a lot of interactions and conversations in the last year or two, even, and just said, I really could have handled that a little bit better than I did. And if, every time I think about what I did, what the case was, the common theme was always that there was alcohol involved, or hard alcohol involved. And so I've decided I'm going to try and take a break from that. Yeah,
I can't say that I have experienced any time in my entire life where I thought somebody who was inebriated was more
better.
pleasant or better. I find it to be personally really ugly and distasteful. It does not appeal to me in any way, shape, or form, and I think that inhibitions are negative and positive. A person.
Yeah,
I mean that's a choice word, but being self-reflective and being careful about one's behavior, I think, is a better example than using the word, because inhibition maybe has, I don't know, I think it has positive and negative
sure.
connotations,
Yeah,
but I think that a person being thoughtful. I mean, let's put it this way: people tend to sometimes go from the lung to the tongue without thinking when they're sober. They don't
that's
need
right.
any help. They don't need any help in losing control of what good behavior is. And if a person, I think, I think that people should speak in a way that's very thoughtful and self-reflective all the time. Okay, that's a lot to ask, but I think that that's what we should strive for, and I don't think any
Sure.
type of a substance helps with that. But that's my perspective. But that's how I feel.
I think it's also a muscle. I think it's also, I think thoughtfulness is a muscle and patience is a muscle. And the more that you practice it and the more that you strengthen it, the more natural it comes. And I think that that's like the case with most, like, good traits are known as good traits and hard traits for a reason. Like, if they were good and if they were easy, then everyone would do it. And if they were, if it was so simple, then everyone would always be thoughtful and kind and compassionate, and find that balance between, your inhibitions and, like, kind of letting yourself go a little bit and being a little bit more vulnerable and out there. And to practice, the healthy balance of that. But it's muscles. And so, if you don't work those out and you don't flex them and you don't use them on a regular basis, then it's very difficult to just pick up and just flip a switch like that. Um, that's I want to talk about your career. I want to talk about your life, your career, education, your specialty. You want to start by telling me about school, about where you went to, about college education, where you got started.
Well, many years ago, many years ago, I took a job that was like a Sunday school for intellectually disabled and handicapped children, to have like a little respite program on a Sunday. And
What was
um, and I really loved working with students with special needs and stuff. And I
when was this?
found,
At what point? How old?
I'm sorry.
At what point in your life was this?
Probably about 35, 36 years ago, something like that, hard to
You were
imagine.
still, so
But
did you always want to be in education? You always wanted to be a
no,
teacher?
I actually had thought for a while that I wanted to be a physical therapist because I loved the idea. I love exercise and movement, and I thought about that idea. But somehow, I ended up going to college. I went to Adelphi, and then I went for a second master's in education administration in City College in New York, and I went into special ed. And after in New York State, which was where my first job was, you can't work in New York City. You can work um, w- after a BA while you're getting your master's, but in New York State, you have to have a master's first. And I got my master's, and I got my first job, and I worked in New York State. And after 5 years, I decided to move my job, not my location, not my home, but my job to New York
Mm-hmm.
City. And I've been working in New York City um, since then. So we're talking like 32 years.
It's crazy. It's
Yeah,
crazy.
that's 31 years that I've been
So since the early
in special ed.
'90s.
Yeah, like since 92, something like that. Yeah,
Got
92.
it. Got it. And you were
And
living in Muncie at the time? Or you were living in New
uh,
York still?
I was living in Muncie at the time. I already lived here, and then in Suffern, and I started working, and I found that I didn't have, what we call the prejudice of low expectations. You know, I, I just thinking about it in thinking about doing this podcast, and I was thinking about it, and I was remembering this one child in my first job who was in a wheelchair and unable to speak,
Mm-hmm.
and he also didn't have he didn't have a lot of movement in him, but he was able to use his arms and his hands. And it didn't occur to me not to try to teach him to read receptively. And this was my first job,
Yeah.
and my first job was with students who were with children, young children, who were in some of them even had augmentative communication devices and multiply handicapped, and I had a student with a feeding tube. And I remember that I had a number line, and I taught this child how to count with this number line by pointing, and reading also by pointing to letters and so on. And I remember the response that I got from his parents and the school. They were shocked. The parents were so shocked that I had this expectation that this child could possibly read or count, even though
Yeah.
he couldn't talk. And this, you have to understand something. This is before the electronics that we have today. He did
Sure.
end up, this child, and I ended up going with him to be fit to with his family. They invited me, and I remember thinking about it and thinking like, what did I do? What was so great? What was the big deal? He
Yeah.
can't talk, so we'll have him, And
Yeah.
I was thinking, I thought about it, and and I remember the response by the family, that they were so shocked. They had so much gratitude for somebody actually believing that their kid could do something.
Yeah.
And after that, it was a big motivation for me. But that was back in my first job, back in when I was still working in New York State, and and then I switched to students who were not as severely handicapped, and when I went
Mhm.
into kind of specialize in more children who were learning disabled, And I worked
Learning
in
disabled.
sort of
What spectrum is learning disabled fall under? Is that
well, these are
dyslexia,
children.
ADHD, or
Yeah, these are children with mostly average intelligence with a disability, meaning that there's scatter between in their processes. So, for example, they have average intelligence, but they have difficulty in a certain process,
sure?
and there's a discrepancy between their IQ and their performance. So,
Right.
what happened? This child has met all the milestones and they're doing great, but they can't read. Why? What's going on here?
Sure.
And to me, um, I loved that so much because it was more fast paced, and I was able to see the results of my work
Uh huh.
very and I got very excited about teaching reading, and I got very very excited, and I. Honestly, to this day, I know that a lot of people in my field don't feel this way, but I'm still excited. I'm
Hmm. It's
even to this
amazing.
day, I'm still excited every time I read something, every time I learn something new about teaching and learning and how the brain works. I'm still excited, and it's so fascinating the way that we learn and the way that we absorb it. And unfortunately, a lot of this system um, and I mentioned this to you the other day, that the system, a lot of the system is not set up for the individual. So you have very, very bright young people who
Fall through the
suffer
cracks. Yeah.
and they suffer from low self-esteem, and they suffer because they're not recognized, and they don't
Hmm.
accentuate the positive. That song accentuate the positive. They don't find the goodness and the strength, but rather they keep just. So you need to have a balance so that
Yeah.
you accentuate the positive while you work on an intervention. So it's kind of been my life's professional work. Really, it's been my life's work, and so I
And I feel
came
like you do that with
to.
family too, right? You do that with raising your family. Is you approach it with that same kind of patience and love and enthusiasm. I mean, from
Well, I don't know if my
what I could
children
see.
would all agree with that when they were growing up. I
Oh
would,
well, no one
you
appreciates
know,
it when they're growing up.
listen, when you're raising children and there's a hustle and a bustle and you have a big family and there's a lot going on, but I do think that I maybe perhaps there was a lot of that was involved. I was always thinking um, about how this would impact my children in the future. What would their memory be? I
Hmm.
tried to do that. I can't say that I was always successful, but I try to do that with my grandchildren as well and my students. One thing I can tell you is that my experience with students is that um, the criticisms could be that I cared too much, you know.
Yeah.
So, but they knew they were being approached by 50% or 75% professional and maybe 25 to 50% mommy. They
Yeah.
could
Of
feel
course.
they could feel that, and to this day that way. But I left. When I came to New York City. I left um, early childhood and elementary school and went into high school,
Oh boy,
and that was
that's another world.
and that was another world. And then I've been in high school now for all those years. I've been in high school now. So when you talk about adolescence, yeah, I've been in high school now for about 25 years. So
What are some of the big differences you've noticed in the education styles when it comes to, or maybe even either differences or similarities in your approaches when you have to deal with a high school kid or a middle school kid or an adolescent? Because, like, for example, I noticed that no matter how old, people do respond extremely well to praise, and like, for example, I know that with my students, I get a lot better work with my students when I smile at them and tell them, I know you have a lot more in you than this. I know how smart you are. I know how capable you are. Let's get some more. Let's dig a little deeper and get more out of this. And like, they feel like, I guess this is what you're saying about the higher expectations. I was like, I know you're smart. I know you're creative. Like, come on, let's see what you have. And like, they love that I am praising them and encouraging them at the same time. And I feel like kids respond the same way. I mean, everyone's looking for validation, everyone's looking for compliments. So I could imagine that'd be one of the similarities, right?
Without a doubt. I mean, it's human nature to want to be surrounded by and to cleave to something that makes you feel good. Nobody wants to feel bad. Nobody wants to be in pain. No one wants to feel badly, not about themselves, not about their surrounding. So when you find good in people, they definitely, but the difference between middle school and high school is that in middle school is probably the most difficult age group to work on because they're not children and they're not near adulthood. Whereas in high school, all these kids are maybe not so much ninth grade, but they're starting to realize that they're getting closer to adulthood and to that this. Hey, wait a minute, this this is still getting a little serious here. I may have to go out there into this in the world. I always say to the teachers that I work with, you have to think about what your students are going to do the day after they leave high school. What are you preparing them for? And I also tell the teachers that I work with and schools that I work with that you have to be an independence coach. So in middle school, you have to approach them with a lot of respect because they want to be adults. They
Yeah.
want to have respect, but they also are dealing with a whole bunch of changes in their life and their body and their surrounding. They're dealing with a huge. They're really recognizing peer pressure. Not that elementary school doesn't have peer pressure, they do, but it intensifies as they're
Hmm.
getting into pre-adolescence. Um, and then we hope that as the students get into 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, they're starting to find their identity and with the right encouragement to try to sort of find their way and to know what they want to do in high school and beyond. So,
Yeah.
you know, we one of the things that in the public school system, and I think it should be in every system that we try to take very seriously. I don't know if we do, but we try to take very seriously is transition to adulthood.
Yeah.
What are you doing that's going to help that child in their interests? And I
So what
think
do you
that's
do?
important.
So
Well,
what are some examples?
some examples is that if a child is interested, let's say, in art or music or finance or architecture or whatever the case may be, accounting, whatever the case may be, medicine, um, animals, whatever the case may be, we want to give that child opportunities to learn about it, to
Yeah.
explore about it, and even perhaps some work-based learning where students can actually get a job or get some experiences working with children. There are opportunities all over for young people.
Yeah.
So I think that it's important that that we focus on what some of the interests that a child has, and if there's negative behaviors, to to channel those behaviors to positive.
Sure.
What is a what? How can we take that you know energy and
Yeah.
and channel it? So I mean, transition in from first grade to second grade, from fifth grade to sixth grade, from 10th grade to 11th, and then from 12th to adulthood, whether it's
Yeah.
college, higher education, whether it's yeshiva, whether it's a
Hmm.
vocational environment. We
Sure.
need to really focus. One size does not fit all.
And that's what's such a daunting task. It's so daunting because you're a teacher, and if you have a class of 25 kids or 30 kids, and each one of them requires attention, and each one of them requires care, and you have to notice what works for them and what doesn't. I mean, I know myself, and I have small classes. You know, I mean, my two classes that I'm teaching now are 8 and 9 kids respectively. But the first year that I was teaching, my classes were 16 and 18 kids, and I couldn't do it. I don't know, I don't know how you could you're almost forced to teach in broad strokes as opposed to customizing and dealing with your students individually, and I mean I only taught for 3 hours, 2.5 3 hours a day at the time, but I noticed that in order to be, and I was going back and forth about feeling guilty about how, to what extent I was a good or bad teacher. How much effort to, like how much time outside of the classroom am I putting into paying attention to each kid's work, noticing things about their personality, thinking about the correlation between the work and their behavior and what they're putting on paper and what they say in class, and to say this is actually the picture of a student, and I have a responsibility as the educator to help them become themselves and grow into themselves. And I don't know how people do it with 20 kids in the classroom, even 15 in the classroom, kids in the classroom. I mean, it's so daunting. It's I don't know. What do you think?
Um, it is daunting, and it is difficult, and when you're teaching a 48-minute class or whatever it is,
Yeah.
there is
By the
a
time
there is
everyone
a
sits
limit.
down, by the time everyone
Uh,
sits down and gets settled in, it's 10 minutes. By the time
yeah.
everyone's ready to go, it's 5 minutes left
Well,
to class. And
well,
you're like,
I guess there are systems that you could put in place that things get done faster. I think the bottom line is that if you pay attention, like for example, paying attention to a kid's expression and their eyes. So, sometimes kids look like a deer in the headlights, and they don't have a clue of what you're talking about. I think that if you have to understand, but I think that there is something, I don't mean to get into jargon or get into anything
sure,
specific, but there is something about universal design for learning. There is something about using a multi-sensory approach, trying to use different modalities, trying to use multiple ways of engagement, as they say. I mean, like, again, I don't want to get into jargon, but if you do that, if a good teacher tries to assess students in different ways, a good teacher tries to use different ways of presenting things, right?
yes,
So as they say in the business, stay away from chalk and talk. So if you do that, then you reach more children, because people learn in different ways. That goes back to being individuals. So some people have strengths and weaknesses and different, but most people, it's multisensory. Most people, you may be a stronger. You may say, oh, I have to hear it or I have to see it, but most people learn in. So I think that if teachers think about that, and they think about saying, how can I present this, in multiple ways? How can I present it for the different type of a thinker? How can I present it so that somebody has an aha moment? And then the other thing I think is that sometimes, if you try, and you have to have a certain talent as a teacher to be able to use station teaching or small group instruction, or being having that control. So then you're able to, let's say, reiterate for kids who need to hear it in another way, or because what's going to happen is that there's going to be a percentage of children who are going to get it on the level that you expect, a large
mm,
percentage, maybe 80%, right?
yeah,
As we know. And then there's going to be a percentage of kids who just maybe need to be reassured. And then there's a percentage of kids who are going to be a deer in the headlights. So and those kids are going to feel unsafe,
yeah,
and that's going to cause a problem. So, and that's true of every grade or environment. It's sort of like walking into the motor vehicle, and they're giving you 10 commands about what
hmm
you need to go to, and five different lines, and you feel unsafe, and you start to look around, and you feel stupid, and you feel insecure, and you don't know where to go, and you're
yeah,
afraid to ask. So we don't want our kids to feel that way. So I think that the most we can do, the best we can do, when you teach, especially when you're teaching a departmental, and you're not in elementary school and you're not with a kid all day and you're teaching 45-minute creative writing class, the most you can do is be as creative in your presentation, to be able to think about all different types of learners and what could be the possible obstacles in getting and understanding this point, so that everybody feels safe. I think if everybody feels safe, um, then they feel like they can listen to you. They can take what you have to say.
sure, sure. Yeah, I've noticed. I'll go back. There's times where I'll be giving a class and I'll see the either the deer in headlights look or the absolutely no engagement looks, and I'll feel the whole room kind of just feels like someone sucked all the energy out of the room, um, and I'll realize most of the time, and and I mean, I'm pretty good about this. I don't do this very often, but if I get frustrated about that, I have to catch myself, or I'll just say before I even get frustrated, guys, I know that this is hard, and in fact, I probably am not presenting this as well as I could, so I'm not mad at you guys, but we got to figure out a way to pull this all together. So what can we do now for the rest of today that I can get you guys more engaged? Because I'm not showing up with, I didn't show up with a 100% game plan. I made a mistake. I should have been more prepared. I should have thought of a more creative way to present this material. I know it's hard. I know it's not easy, and I know it's not, it's like again. I think that there's a problem with sticking a 17-year-old or 16-year-old behind a desk for 10 hours and then in the ninth hour coming in and getting mad at them for not being able to sit still. And I'll be like, no, that's on. Like, if I know that's what I'm walking into and that's the job I signed up for, then that's a job I have to accommodate. I have to accommodate to you guys to say I'm teaching the ninth hour. Like there's like it's part of my responsibility to teach you in a different way than if I were to teach you in the first hour of the day or the second hour of the day when you have more stamina. So I'm sorry for not showing up the way that I should have. What can we do now? Should we do a different assignment? Should we do something that's more engaging where everyone's having a conversation? Should we pop on a video of someone doing this, someone expressing the same point with visuals, like you said, different modalities to express the same point, because right now I'm not doing the best job that you guys need me to do, and so I'm sorry about that. And I'll usually say that to them, and it gives them a sense of it makes them want to work with me. If I yell at them for just being, oh, you guys never pay attention, and you guys are the worst, and blah blah, like it doesn't get anywhere, and it doesn't make me feel better. It doesn't make them feel better. But if they see that I'm putting in the effort to work with them, and I'm admitting that I'm not perfect, I'm admitting that that as a teacher I've got flaws and I don't have it all worked out, then they're more inclined to treat me with that same courtesy that I'm providing them. And I found that that's been a really, really useful tool when it comes to teaching, is just being honest about the times where you're falling short and saying, I want to do better. Can you guys work with me on this? And it's been one of the few value. I found that to be something that is applicable in everything I do, in my relationships with Rachel. Like like I said, I was grumpy I was grumpy today, and I was like, listen, if I say something to you that comes off as mean, I'm really sorry. I woke up on the wrong side of the bed. I'm cranky. I'm feeling short. Please don't take it personal. I know I just this is what it's going to be like for a couple hours, and I do that with everyone and everything. Customer calls me, they're upset about something. I say the same thing. I should have shown up. I should have been better. And I'm sorry about that. Do you mind working with me on this? And being vulnerable like that and admitting that I've made mistakes has never, ever, ever led to anything really bad, except for unhealthy relationships, in which case they take advantage
Right.
of it and throw it in your face, and you kind of tell what kind of people
Right.
you're dealing with in that case.
Exactly. Exactly. I think every time I walk in, I've been for the past quite a few years. I've been mostly doing adult learning. It's mostly teachers in schools and college students. But one thing I could tell you is every single solitary time I stand before a class or a group, I always think to myself, "It's showtime." I always say
Yeah.
that to myself, "It's showtime," and I've told you that before. And you have to understand something when a person gets up in front of an audience or a comic gets up in front of an audience, sometimes you lose your audience, and sometimes whatever you prepared doesn't go over. Just like in a
Uh-huh.
comic, the joke doesn't go over the way you thought it would. So there needs to be a type of flexible. You need to know what to do. And one thing I can tell you is that you have to understand that there's a certain amount of time that a person could attend to a lecture type of a thing before
Yes.
they start to, adult learning is exactly the same way. And you're talking about high school kids who have been in the classroom all day long. So you have to, I find that if you have a certain amount of time where you lay out maybe what you're doing, and then you have the students be able to work together, or you have the students be able to explore something, or you have what we call, they can, you have them talk to an elbow partner, or however you want to do it, to give people a chance. Another thing that really works is that you have to understand that teachers are entertainers in a lot of ways with a knowledge of education. So I find, especially for high school and middle school students, is that you want to, and if you're teaching creative writing or you're teaching, math is different, but you want to come in with sort of some type of a very thought provoking um, do now, or something for them to ponder when they walk in. So one of the things that um, that really works, and to also get kids getting started immediately, is that there's an expectation that when students walk into a classroom, there's something there that's waiting for them, which we call a do now or something, but there's something that's waiting for them. Either it's a handout, and it could be a thought-provoking thing. It could be something that makes you think about something that has to do with their life and the
Yeah.
topic. So
Yeah.
if you do that, then you already, it's like walking in, even if I go to something that I'm going to, like an adult learning a shir or a Torah class that I go to, the better, the best presenters or the best teachers are somebody who starts with something that gets you. It's like a good book.
Yes.
You know,
Yes. You need a hook.
if the first, yeah, if the first few lines of the good book are not intriguing, you're gonna move on. So that so teachers have to be skilled. That's the problem also with a lot of teachers in higher education, is that they may be expert in their field. They may be a scientist, but it doesn't mean they could teach it. So
That's right.
teaching is a
They're not
skill,
necessarily
and
they're not
you know,
necessarily presenters or performers.
yeah, yeah. So
Right.
so a person has to be a presenter and a performer and an expert in their skill. So teaching is a skill. Your subject is a skill, and you need to keep growing in it. So a person should be able to get up in front of a classroom and command the audience, and
Yeah.
then the class will be able to sort of, as we say, take it from you. They'll be able
Yeah.
to hear what you have to say. If you turn off your students or or your audience, then even if they're compliant, it doesn't mean they're listening.
That's right. That's right. I hate compliance. I'd rather engagement in chaos, but at least like it's on the target than blind compliance. It drives me crazy. There was what you were saying reminded me of the book Thinking Fast and Slow. One of the things that Daniel Kahneman, who wrote the book and won the Nobel Prize in economics for, based on decision making and performance and the way our brains work and the way we process information. He says that, we have two parts to our brain. We have the more reflexive part, 1+1, 2. You don't have to think about it. Which street do you live on? Garfield. I don't have to think about it. And then there's the analytical part of your brain. What's 17 plus 23? Like, you have to stop for a second, generally speaking, and think about it, right? And our brains are constantly going back and forth between which mode to use, but we don't like to use the analytical part of our brain, which is why we are lazy thinkers. We like to look for patterns that we can assume, like this happens quite a bit with my family. I'm sure you can understand, you can relate, but like I'll expect certain members of my family to behave in certain ways, and then and I'll jump to conclusions before I even hear a story, a whole story about them. If I'm having a conversation with them, I won't finish hearing them out because I'm expecting. Like my brain just jumps to what I expect for them to say or do, or the place for them to get before they even finish their point, and I don't even let them do that. Right? That's because our brains are relatively lazy. We don't like to think analytically or think hard. It's considered like burning. It's work. It's hard work. And so when it comes to presenting and performing, one of the things that he said to do is very important is to change things up, and is because if I'm lecturing in this exact tone for 45 minutes or an hour or 2 hours or 5 hours, your brain automatically just zones out. It detects that the way that you're speaking is exactly the same, that there's nothing new, there's nothing jumping out at you. But when you pause for an extended, like, you notice that like good speakers, if they're speaking and then they're getting up to a point and they're building up and they pause for a second, 2 seconds, 5 seconds, and there's a gap in the flow, your brain goes, wait a minute, there was just a rhythm and now the rhythm's interrupted. What's happening? And then it'll jump back to attention. So with that knowledge as a teacher, as an educator, as a performer, you can say, and that's actually, it's funny because there was a Springsteen interview that I was listening to, and Springsteen was talking about how he was trying when he was younger. He used to write these crazy songs because they were swinging in tempo and pace and chord progressions, and they didn't follow really any kind of typical patterns. And the reason why, he said, was he was opening up for these big bands like Cher and Chicago and the Allman Brothers, and he's like, and we needed to do something to get the audience to pay attention to us. And one of the tools that they implemented was a song where it's a big sound and then it just stops. And then everyone's like, wait, what just happened? And then it picks up again, and like, and then indeed, part of the most famous, one of the most famous parts of his concerts are the energy and the tempo and the pace that the audience just like revels in. You never know when it's going to just stop. And when he was trying out he was trying out a new drummer, and he was experimenting. He was going through which of the best drummers he was playing, and the drummer was behind him typically, as is usually the band set up, like, the lead guys in the front, and he was playing, and then he would just throw up his hand, and the drummers that did not stop on that second were just sent packing, were just sent home, and the ones that were recognizing that he wants to try to control the audience's, like regulate their enthusiasm, their passion, and the music, and understood that he's trying to do that. He's constantly reading him and the room around to see what you could do to manipulate the pace to try to get people to keep on being excited and pay attention. And I think that, I guess part of teaching should also be, or part of training for teaching, to be a teacher should also be training to be a performer and training to be a presenter. I think that all this stuff is really, really crucial in order to really have, help make a difference and impact minds, and really change people.
I think that's a really good analogy. I love it. I think it's a great. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. You have to think. You have to think about it, how the brain works. You have to think about how attention works. You have to think about how people react to things. You have to think on your feet. You have to be flexible. You have to be willing to change. I know people don't always respect the field, but they should, because
Yeah,
a good teacher is a very trained individual. Now, in every field, we have people who excel and people who don't, and you know, we have to get through it. I mean, I used to remember, I used to tell my children all the time. I say, listen, you know what? This person that's your teacher is not your mother. You're not married to that person,
hmm,
And people have positive and negative experiences, but I think from the very beginning, and it's one of the things that I do in my teaching college students, is that I have them present. And
yeah,
one of the things that and they have to go into classrooms, so they have to go into classrooms and they have to present, and they're very critical of other teachers that they observe, because and they're haven't it hasn't they're still students themselves, so they know exactly what makes a dedicated and a good teacher.
they
Um,
do. It's part of the education to teach teachers. Is that the case?
no, I think in my I no I'm sort of still in the game, and I try very hard to teach in a way that represents how I feel about things.
Nice. Yeah.
Um, I don't think I had to I mean I've gotten feedback from students who, for example, if I had to be out for a couple of sessions and I got feedback. Everybody's different. Not everybody teaches that way, but a good teacher, and thinks about many different things. They think about how people learn. They think about their audience. They think about
Yeah.
how they're presenting it. They think about their subject matter. Is it approachable? Is it not approachable? What are different ways that people may hear it? What are ways that I could clarify it? That's why a person has to be well prepared before they go into a classroom. No one, I've been teaching this course that I'm teaching, Foundations of Special Education, for since 2018, and I have never once taught it without revising
I
my
was gonna. That's
PowerPoint.
awesome. It's awesome. It's awesome.
You
I
know,
love that.
and Saba, he used to spend hours and hours and hours preparing to teach the same class that had been teaching for many years.
Yeah.
So, you have to bring in relevance. You have to relook at it with fresh eyes as you teach it. I also, when, the fact that I have this background in special education, I makes the presentation, you want your presentation to be multisensory. You want the presentation to, when somebody looks at it, you want their eyes to go where you want their eyes to go to. So all of this goes into good teaching. I think maybe that's why I find it still fascinating, still relevant, because there's
Because
always room to grow.
yeah, there's life in it. So it's so great that you say that because I had a student ask me this week actually. He's like, Mr. Hirschman, like, how do you not like know what you're going to teach? You've been teaching for a couple of years now. Just take a class that you taught. And I'm like, but everything's changed. Like everything's changed from last year, from 2 years ago. You guys aren't the same people, and the way that I understand this material is not the same, and the way that the way that I think to present it is not the same. And I was like, the teachers. I said, I mean, I hope I wasn't being too harsh. But I was like, the teachers that just keep the same syllabus and just come in that year after year and day after day, and they don't keep anything new. I was like, those are dead classes. Those are classes where like the material might be you might be learning, but the class like there's no life in there. Like there's you know like you need a dose of you need you need a dose of being yeah of like having to have a sense that the classroom itself, that the material is breathing and living and adjusting and evolving with the people and the times and there's a demand and there's a call for an action to say we are we learn differently or we are different people or the way that we process things are different. What are you going to do about it? The material might not even change, but the presentation's got to change, something's got to change. And I was like, those are dead classes. And I was like, I'm always trying to figure out ways to keep my classes alive. I feel like my classes are the material that I work on before I walk into a classroom. They deserve, like, they have to be treated and tend to and cared for them, like, as if they were a real person in these classes, because they're being applied to real people, and it's really 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 important to be able to do something like that, to be able to you can tell when a presentation has life to it, and you can tell when a presentation is stale and just memorized and just being, mass printed and repeated and printed and repeated and just done over again, like a printing press almost. Like but it's a lot to ask for, and it's a lot to ask someone to take $50,000, $60,000 and put that amount of time and effort and work and to do everything like that every single day for each of your classes and each of your students. And you either have to have a martyr or a hero or or I don't know how I don't even know how I would go about training teachers to do that. Like, it's something that I feel like people have to feel like, oh, it's almost a calling and something they have to take upon themselves to do. Um, but you can't push someone to breathe life into something. You can't force it.
Well, it definitely is a calling, but you have to understand something. When I think about a nurse, for example,
Yeah.
you know, there are people who are, it's a calling, it's a passion. And I think to myself, oh my God, why would anybody want to do that job? That's a really, really rough job. I get nervous when I walk into a medical environment. And then there are people who, like Esther, my daughter-in-law, who's passionate and loves the medical field and
Yeah.
is so great and constantly learning and constantly loving it. For a person who goes into teaching, should have a calling and a passion for it, but also that you have to understand something. You for somebody who really loves it, the process is enjoyable. So I'll give you an example. You know, um, with Saba, he taught sociology, right? So he
I know.
loved current events and he loved to bring something fresh and new. So that was something that we used to do together. Is like I would go comb through the Wall Street Journal, the Weekend Wall Street Journal, and different things to look for things that will culturally impact our society. And I'd get all excited and I'd show him the article and then we discuss about how he could use it in his classroom and how he could make it into an activity in a group. So every single time he taught the basics, but every single class had was infused with things that were relevant to students. For
Mm-hmm.
example, part of sociology, for example, was, let's say, the art of comedy. Comedy is a very changes very
Mm-hmm.
much with the
Oh,
culture.
sure.
So he would love very much. He loved to manipulate and to bring in different compare comedy, slapstick, different types of comedy, and also comedy over the ages. So we would look through things together. So for him, he wasn't sitting, or for myself, he wasn't sitting and saying, let me see how much am I making a minute. The amount of time
Well, yeah,
that
of
I put
course.
in, you know what I mean? For him, it was he loved doing it, and it was part of his passion. It's part of his enjoyment. So I think
First,
that
yeah, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
no,
Sorry to cut you off.
I'm just going to say that I'm just going to respond and say that for teachers, you can if a person goes into that field, um, teaching for example, teaching in a public school has a lot of perks, and it has, a 401k, and it has certain things that are perks, but no one's going to be rich. No
Yeah.
one's going to get rich ever
Yeah.
teaching. This is not
Yeah.
the corporate world, and this is not. You don't go into that field
Do you think you get
with
better
that in mind.
teachers? Do you think you get better teachers if it's more competitive in terms of pay? Like if someone like the way I think about it is like I have a friend of mine that I grew up with, who I was very close with, and he's brilliant. Went to MIT, got a master's there, electrical engineering. He works, I mean, he actually one of the things that he did, one of the things he did for his master's lab was actually get a car to run on aluminum, like instead of electricity. He was trying to look for alternative, methods for a car to work. And like he was like brilliant, brilliant, brilliant guy, and he is incredible at teaching. The way that like part of what makes him so smart is that he's able to process complicated ideas, break them down to their cores and their roots, and explain them to almost anyone. And he's my age. He's 2 3 months older than me. And when I was in high school, I did extremely poorly on my PSATs for math. Math was not my strong suit in high school. I've gotten better at it since then, but it was not my strong suit. And he taught me. He tutored me in the SATs, and my PSAT scores, my average score was going from like the mid 400s to like the high 600s in just a matter of weeks, or maybe a month or two. And but education was never going to be for someone like him who is so brilliant and could get a job. He can get a job at NASA. He can get a job. He can teach himself coding. He can get a job at robotics engineering or biomedical engineering. And like, why would he ever pick why would he ever pick teaching when he has all these opportunities? And so the question would be like, do you think that offering that being that making that giving more of a financial incentive would actually increase the quality of the teachers, or do you think it kind of opens things up maybe for more? I mean, there's also plenty of room for gaming the system and corruption and messing around with things like that too.
Well, I
I
think
don't know.
I definitely think so. I definitely think so, but I think that it depends on what your criteria for success is. If your criteria for success is only the person's grades in a specific area, then that necessarily isn't the right criteria. So if you have the criteria where a person is not only is knowledge in their content, but or knowledge in their theory. Teaching, for example, in first grade, just even teaching reading is no joke. There's a percentage of students who have difficulty. So I think that how you present it, working on that, knowing your content, and paying a person an appropriate salary to meet that preparation will elevate the entire field.
Right. And what's
Absolutely.
more important, what's more important than the future of our world? What's
Nothing.
more important than teaching our kids and our grandkids and the next generation? You know, I mean, I
Right.
don't know.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
it's weird. It's weird to me. It's
It's a
strange.
problem that people discuss all the time, and
Yeah.
with that should also go. Um, there should be a sense of what a good building good character, um, building
Yeah.
good relationships between student to
Yes.
student,
Self-expression.
having a certain, yeah, and having certain expectations of how people talk to each other, how people greet each other. All those things are really an important part of education, and um, the preparation for teachers. In my experience, um, in the secular teaching environment, is that there many teachers are not prepared. Many teachers go into the classroom. Now, there are naturals. You could teach, you have to be, there is an element of being a natural. You can
Hmm.
teach a person content, but you really can't teach a person how to be a teacher. It's something that's kind of natural to a person. You could take that and grow it and
Hmm.
perfect it and work on it. But a person really, it's sort of like not everybody is cut out to do every job. So
Yes.
I think we take that into consideration. And like I said before, somebody who is an expert in a certain field, I mean, just because, that doesn't mean just because somebody studied biology and graduated with from college with honors in biology, that's a good step. That's the first step.
Sure.
But then they also have to be able to present the material.
Yeah, definitely. And then it's something that you and I have talked about before a little bit, but also the fact that as you get better at teaching, part of your way up the ladder is that you get taken out of the classroom and put into administrative positions. Like
Well,
you have great
that's a
teachers that
choice.
get, is it?
Yeah, no one's taken out because you need to have a go for a second master's. So nobody's taken out
Well,
really,
are they
because
incentivized to not stay?
well, yeah, it's incentivized mm, for a couple of really important reasons.
Okay.
One is that teachers are not respected in the way they should be. They're not, and two, there's a monetary gain in going into administration. So you're right. People, and then there's another reason. And if you're talking about the secular environment, um, some classrooms are very challenging. So when you when you put those three things together, you incentivize a person to want to go into administration. For me, I never I continued to teach and I never lost that love of teaching, but I also, because I loved the art and the specialty of special education. I also loved the compliance part of it and the instructional part of it and overseeing other schools. So for
Right.
me, but I didn't leave teaching for many, many, many years. I didn't make that switch. And then when I made that switch, I started teaching in college. So I never left the teaching. But
It came at a
again,
cost, didn't it? It came at a cost to not leave the classroom, right?
well, it
It
came
came
at
at
a cost because I didn't make as much money.
right,
Um,
but then-
yeah.
but right, but I mean, like, don't you, I mean, I don't really know very much what the numbers are at any of this kind of thing, public school teaching or administration or anything like that, and so I can't really talk about it. But if it's going to be like, if you get feedback that you're great in the classroom and they're like, okay, well, now you have a choice to be an administrator and oversee the way that classrooms are run. You give them like you got to be in a position where you're in a martyr to stay a teacher. You got to sacrifice, you got to sacrifice for, yourself.
I don't
And
think so. I think
no,
there's a lot of people who don't, there's a small percentage of people who go into administration in comparison to the amount of people who stay in the classroom. So I think
yeah,
that I know, like, Saba never ever even considered it. He loved every second of being in front of a classroom. He thrived on it and he loved it. Um, so it depends on where career wise, where you want to go. But I'm working with teachers now who are real specialties in their fields, and it would never occur to them. They're teaching, very difficult subject areas. They're teaching physics and they're teaching some very difficult subjects, and it doesn't occur to a lot of people to go into administration. And at some point, in New York City, anyway, it's not as true in other states. In other states, the teachers' cost of living may be less, and teachers make comparatively less. In New York City, the salaries are probably better than in some other places.
cost of
I think
living is
it's a
astronomical,
choice.
though. Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's a choice, that that people make. And but it's also quality of life, depending on what the quality of life in the classroom is. So it's not a simple answer. It's really more complicated. It's more complicated than that. But I think for a good percentage of people, they choose to
stay in the
stay
class.
with their field.
Yeah,
Yeah. And you miss it. You miss that interaction. If you love to that interaction, student to teacher to student interaction, then you could imagine, there's a certain, if you love that interaction with students and
yeah, yeah.
teaching and seeing them get something and them growing, you don't want to miss that.
It's have I don't know. There's something about it. It's weird. For example, I have some students now that I've had for the last 2 years. Because it was my third year teaching. So my first year teaching, I taught ninth and 10th and 11th grade. My second year, I taught ninth and 11th. I don't think I taught 10th. Maybe I taught one of each. I don't remember. And then this year, I'm just teaching 10th. And so there's a couple of classes where I've had these students for 2 years, and we've gotten to know each other very, and one actually,
Mhm.
so there's one benefit is that they know me and we know each other's style, and I can tell whether they're putting in effort or not, and whether they're using AI to help them write their essays or not, and on the other hand, they all know that Mr. Hirschman is a laid back, fun guy that doesn't really like conformity or or anything too strict or too he's a little bit more laid back, and so when they know that about me, it becomes easier to kind of take advantage and hijack the classroom, of course, which as a 15-year-old you're prone to do one way or the other. But there was always like a very weird, a very real and warm chemistry and spark that was in the classroom, especially once as we got to know each other over the course of a year or 2 years. And then this year, it's interesting to observe that there's certain students that come up to me and that like clearly like, hey, Mr. Hirschman, it's great to see you. What's going on? It's great. Like, that you can tell the connection's still there. And there's certain students where like it almost feels it's awkward, where there's like a tension where they're like, where I was seeing you every day and we're talking about our lives every day and we're talking about these things, and now I don't see you, I don't talk to you ever. And like, what do we do with this kind of weird relationship that we had and have now? Like, I can't talk to you the same way I used to, because we used to have each other every day. We spend time together every day. And now I see you every couple, once a week or every couple, passing by in the hallway, but like we're in a rush or whatever, and the whole, and like I want to say like, hey guys, like like I still know you, like you still know each other, but I feel like outside of the classroom, the whole environment shifts, and it felt that way. It felt that way when I was a camp counselor too, and it felt that way when I was a camper to my counselors, and it's weird. I don't know what that shift is about, but it throws me off, and there's certain, like I remember even in college, there are certain, where there are certain staff, if I was 3 or 4 years younger than them, our rules for how you behave in a sleepaway camp is very different for a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old, right? But when you're 21 and you're 19 in college, or 22 and 19 in college, your rules are pretty much the same. You know what I mean? You might be you might be applying to jobs instead of taking classes, but like your behavior is pretty much the same. The expectations and social place that you are in your life is pretty much the same. And there's certain people that kind of embrace like, hey, I used to be your counselor, now we're friends, and then the same way like, oh yeah, I used to be a teacher, now we're friends. And then there are the people that are like, oh, it's still weird for me to be friends with you, considering that you were um, considering that last time I interacted with you, you were not allowed to, drink. You weren't allowed to live by yourself. You were, like you wanted to call home because you were homesick, and now the next time I see you, you're an adult, and so it's kind of
Yeah.
weird to keep up those relationships.
I don't think you're meant to actually. It's different in that environment where, in some cases within the community, when you're working in a community, it's very, very different than in a regular school environment. In a school, it's two separate things. So in a community, there are times where people um, carry on and they develop relationships and they end up, buying a house in your community, even though you're 10
Yeah.
years older, you still be friends. And there are it's different when you're living within a certain type of a community and a society. In a school environment, and I could think of so many cases I couldn't even tell you. uh, you're not meant to, you do your very best, and then you don't know, you never know your impact, and
Hmm.
you don't need to.
Yeah.
It's not That's not the relationship that's being set up. The
Right.
relationship that's being set up is, I'm your teacher, your mentor, your principal, your assistant principal, your guidance counselor, whatever the case may be,
Right. I have a
for this
place.
year.
Yes. Yes.
And I'm going to give you my all. I care about you, and this and that, and then you move on, and that relationship is meant for it to move on, and you hope that you make an impact on people's lives, but you don't have an expectation that they will have anything further. And i
So I have a
i think
hard
of a
time with
student.
that. I have a very hard time with that balance. Like I feel like investment creates relationship. I feel like when you like, like there's a bond here. Like how does it, like, and of course I understand. I agree with what you're saying. Even like not every relationship is meant for everywhere all the time in the same way. But it's hard for me. It's weird for me.
Yeah, because you're not used to it yet. But that's what teaching. You have to understand something. It's different. It's a little bit different when you work within the community, because when you work within the community, you might come in contact with people again. You never know. But teaching is not set up for long term relationships. Teaching is set up, and that's true of being in a, even if there are times where a student comes back to the school. Every once in a while, I see, alumni coming back into a school that I'm working in. But what you do is you do the best you can, and then you send them off to the wild blue yonder, and you hope that you made an impact, and you don't know if you did or you didn't. But
That's why I'm
but
afraid to become a therapist, by the way. I feel like that. I feel because one of my hangups with therapy is the idea that like I'm spilling myself to someone and then just like disappearing and like just got or that I don't know anything, or that it's not and it's not meant to be. I know it's not meant to be, but like I
you
don't
know,
know.
you
It's hard.
I was I was reading about relationships. I was reading about this very cute story about this relationship that people have. What are those relationships where you're waiting online in the grocery store, and you end up talking to a person and commiserating over something and having this really strong kind of connection, and then you say, okay, bye, and have a nice day. And um and uh, what are those relationships? Those relationships are little perks of life. They're not meant to be long lasting. They're not meant to be anything after that. they're
But
just
how do you
they're
know? But how
just
do you know
they're,
they won't be something more? Like I've turned those kind of relationships into into a guest in the podcast. I've turned those kind of relationships into a
sometimes.
business connection.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes, listen, I met somebody in the gym that ended up living right around the corner from me. So, so
Yeah.
now when she walks by, she waves, and I've spoken to her. I have a relationship every once in a while, but most of the time, if you meet somebody I mean, imagine what it's like if a person the plane is delayed,
Yeah.
or and they have these relationships, or the bus gets stuck. People have relationships that they build, and they're perks of life. They're common occurrences that people should stop and appreciate. And it's humanity, connecting
Hmm.
with humanity. It's not meant so certain relationships are meant to continue, and certain relationships aren't. So
I had it's funny that so I had I was with a guy one time, my friend's younger brother who is I mean he's 27, I think 28, and he happens to be very good looking young man, great shape, very good looking, and we were hanging on we were going me him and my friend's older brother were on the beach together, and a girl walks up to my friend's younger brother, says, "You're beautiful. Can I have your phone number, please?" And my jaw hits the floor because I've never seen anything. I've never seen an interaction like that in my life. And he says, "Sure." Then he thinks for a second. He goes, "Where do you live?" And she's like, "Michigan." He's like, "So you're here on vacation?" He's like, "Yeah." He's like, "So what's talking to me gonna do? What's my number gonna do? Like, when are you going back?" He's like, "Tomorrow." He goes, "Okay." He goes, "Well, I don't know." He goes, "I give you my number. I don't really know what it's gonna like be for. Like what the point is." And she walked away, and she was obviously crestfallen. And I was like, "Dude, like you could have put that like a little nicer. You could have like it must have it must have taken her something to to approach you, And so he's like, he thought about that. He's like, yeah. And then he went over and he expressed like, I didn't mean to like. He goes like, I think you're very sweet. I appreciate you coming over. He goes, just like not every relationship is meant to be, like that kind of relationship, and and obviously this is a more comedic and dramatic version of what you're saying, but it made me think of that. I've never seen that before, and apparently I asked him, and he says it happens all the time, which um, can't be very healthy for
well,
his
good
ego.
for him. Good for him.
Yeah, it can't be very good for his ego, but
I
but
I
but
hope I hope he finds the person who wants more, is attracted to him from many on multiple levels.
yes, yes, I hope so too. I hope so. I think that's what he's looking for too. I think that I mean,
Right,
I think
right.
that it's very funny. So what has been your favorite out of teaching adolescent, high school, and other educators and people to educators to teach? What has been your favorite to teach, or the most that resonated most with you? I don't know about favorite, but that spoke most to you.
Um, that's a difficult question actually to answer. Um, I really,
Or maybe
I'm,
where do you
I
think that you're most equipped to have the most success? How about that one?
also hard. I have to say that there were different times in my life where different things happened, and for me now, um, I really, really love the college. I love them because it happens to be that when you're teaching um, English, or you're teaching a math course, you're teaching something, it's not the same as when you're teaching a bunch of students who are going into the field that you're actually teaching. And
Right.
many of them are working as assistants in the field now. So they're hungry, and they're looking at what you're saying, and so
Mm-hmm.
that's, I really love that. I'm not really doing so much of the professional development I was doing, although I actually, it's not true. I just did one on January 27th, so I guess it's not true. I do love presenting to teachers.
Because you
I
feel
love
like
it.
you're leading leaders. You're arming them with the tools they need.
Well, you know what it is? It's that when I feel I'm advocating for diverse learners. That's really what I feel like I'm doing. I feel like if I'm teaching specially designed instruction, or I'm talking about executive function disorders, or I'm talking about what to do about students with attention deficit disorder, I feel like I'm doing something for those children who aren't can't advocate for themselves,
Right.
and I feel like I'm bringing recognition to those children. As I say, we're helping this most vulnerable of our students. So right. So that, I think, probably is my favorite. The last thing that I just did on January 27th was on executive function. And I think that it gave a lot of food for thought to a lot of teachers.
Hmm.
about what that means when you have a student. Some of those students that we were talking about in that particular class were twice exceptional. They were students with high IQs who were
Hmm.
failing, or who couldn't hand in a paper, or were absolutely could not organize their thoughts, because organization impacts both your academic and your personal life. So
Yeah,
bringing solutions to that really, I think, is my favorite right now.
it's beautiful. It's beautiful. What do you think of homeschooling?
I don't think much of it at all.
You don't think, as in you don't think about it, or you don't think highly of
I
it?
don't think highly of it at all.
Why is
Unless
that?
Because I really believe that the social interaction is really important. Unless there are extenuating circumstances, like a mental illness, or certain situations in a school, I think children belong socializing with other children. Um, it's
What if there's ways to get kids to socialize? What if kids are social in other aspects of their lives? For example, if they were part of leagues or sports or clubs or something like that, but when it comes to like actual like learning, let's say history or science or whatever, that they
Well,
do
what
it on
is the
their own.
credential? What's the credential of the parent homeschooling?
Well, I don't know, but the reason why I'm thinking about this is because there's so many amazing tools today that are so, the the classroom setting from what I've seen, my experience has not really been updated or revamped or overhauled at all since I was teaching. Since I was in school and in middle school or high school or whatever it is. And yeah, there are differences and there are discrepancies, but I find that like I learn like I have so many tools that I can learn by myself that I've learned. I've accumulated so much more knowledge, and I've really found different niches and different specialties and like whole different areas of my life that I love and that I'm interested in that I never ever would have discovered in school or in a formal education system. And I think that the big holdup is what you just described, which is the social aspect that we really need, almost as important. I don't know, arguably, as the amount of knowledge that you're getting is the interaction with people, learning how to interact with people and your friends and people your age, and like how important confidence is, and maneuvering through life, navigating, how to deal with a teacher you don't like, or how to deal with it if you're not good at studying for a certain test. What are other ways that you can go about that you can learn the material, and I understand all that, but there's just so many tools that I think that people can learn so much by themselves that you don't have to be sitting in a classroom for 10 hours a day riddled with ADHD medication and being forced to be in feeling like you're in an environment that you don't want to be in. Like there's so many fun, creative ways to learn now that aren't being embraced by the typical school system, that it might be valuable to. The problem is that I don't know. I've had a lot of thoughts about it really recently, and I guess I haven't figured out the best way to articulate, what all my thoughts are. But I just think that there's a lot more ways to learn out there today. That if a parent doesn't need to be have a master's in education to make sure their kid gets a good education. There's so many tools out there from so many free tools out there from people that really are trying to make information and education low cost or free completely in a unique and fun and interactive way that you almost don't need to stick them in the class in this. You don't need to force a kid that's a circle to be a square anymore.
Well, I'm going to kind of leave you with this, but I do want to say that I think you're selling schools a little short. I think that there's a lot more going on in schools. I think there are extenuating circumstances, and I think that it's that parents really need to be in tune with their kids and advocate for their children. And also, they need to put their children in the right environments that are for them. And I think that in terms of creativity, we pay attention to the needs of our children and see their interests and help them to explore their interests and their creativity. At the same time, the way that schools are set up, where children go to school and they interact, and there are a variety of different activities and learning, and schools have a great deal to offer our children that I do not believe can
It's
happen
worth
at
giving up.
home.
Right.
Now, and I do believe that there are, like I said, there's always and never are not words that I want to abide
Yes.
by. So I do think that there are always extenuating circumstances, but I do believe very strongly that we should be involved in our schools and work with our schools and advocate for our children and be in tune with our kids and listen to them and give them opportunities. That's what, take your kids to different environments, take your kids to different places to explore different things. I went on a couple of things with kids, and I took them to Mystic Seaport, and
Mm-hmm.
we, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
we
You
went,
learn.
and we learned. I actually took many, many years ago, when I was school based many years ago, the whole, I took the school to Rummy's Museum of Jewish Heritage,
Yeah.
where the kids got a chance to learn about the Holocaust as a secular school. So I think that when you give your students the opportunity to see creativity, to explore their interests, to look at humanity in addition to school, and then again, make your schools better.
Yeah.
Involve yourself in your kids' schools.
Yeah.
Talk to your teachers.
Yeah.
Parents can't drop their kids off and walk away.
I was going to
They
say
need to be
that. That's
involved.
yes. I was going to say we can leave with this if you want. One of my favorite. I know that Saba loved him too, but Shimshon Nafal Hirsch, or Samson Nafal Hirsch, who's a huge advocate of education. One of the things he writes in his collective essays is parents think that teachers do their jobs for them. They send their kids to school to do parenting for them. It's like, that's not the job. The teacher's supposed to reinforce what the parents are already doing. And you can't ship your kid off to school and say, well, my job's done. As long as I'm paying the bills for tuition, I'm making sure my kids doing their homework, that's what education is. Like education is first and foremost from the parents. The school is supposed to help fortify and build on that foundation, but you can't abandon responsibility. And part of being a parent, he says that actually even there's a commandment, to Peru or Avu, to have kids and to multiply, and he actually breaks down that commandment into also you don't fulfill that mission, that purpose, until you teach that kid, until you're actually a teacher in your kid's life as well, and you actually make sure that they're armed with what they need to survive. It's not just having a kid and letting them go into the world. It's teaching them to how to make their way into the world and continue their lives and have their own family. And you can't complete your purpose as a parent without making sure that your kids are learning too, and without being a teacher to your kids. Um, so I guess that could be a good place to leave this for now. But I definitely want to do this again, because I feel like there's so many things that we talked about that we didn't get to. But thank you so much for doing this. I really, it's so much fun and it's so informative, and I love it.
Easy, easy to talk to you, Ephraim.
Such a
Easy
pleasure.
to talk to you.
I really appreciate you taking the time, Bobby. I love you. Thank you. We'll be in
Love
touch.
you. Love you.
And I'll talk to you soon. Maybe I'll try. I'll try. If the whole freaking day isn't too crazy, I'll try to swing by on Sunday, if possible.
I hope
Um,
so. That would be great. Let me know.
even for a cup of coffee, of course. Okay, I love you. Thank you for
Okay.
doing this. We'll talk soon. Okay.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Send my love. Bye.
Bye.